The Lasting Effects of a Near-Death Experience, Part 4. After I shared my gift with my wife, she was understandably excited to have a psychic medium for a boyfriend, and proceeded to embarrass me repetitively by using my gifts to spook her friends and family. This ended up being a blessing in disguise, as although it was nerve-wracking to continually explain my gifts and risk ridicule, it also gave me a chance to develop my gifts in a way that I never had before. I had spent the majority of my energy trying to ensure that no one ever found out, but now I was beginning to explore the possibilities. One of the first people my girlfriend outed me to was her cousin, who had been more like a sister to her their whole lives. I'll refer to her as Becky throughout this story to keep things clear. Okay, you could have just written it. Okay. This reading was different than the one I did for my wife. Most notably, I was aware that my wife's mother had passed. I knew her name, etc. This would be completely different, as I wouldn't know in advance if Becky hoped to contact a man or woman or what her relationship with that person would be. The additional variables add to the internal conflict and make it even harder to decide which direction to go. One of the biggest problems that my gifts present for me is that it can be really hard for me to tell what is a message from the spirit and what is my own thought. For the first time during this reading, I decided to try a new tactic. I used a notepad to write down everything that came through my mind without second-guessing it, and afterward I let her review all of my notes and determine for herself what was important. This worked out extremely well, and a number of the things I would have talked to myself out of sharing were important to Becky. This worked out extremely well, and a number of things that I would have talked myself out of sharing were important to Becky. In fact, some of those things were the most important parts of the reading. I went through the exercise I described in the last part, and settled down to connect with Becky's deceased loved one. Another question I get asked a lot is, why do certain people come through and others do not? Or why does one person come through before another? The truth is that I have no idea why that is. I have some thoughts, such as people with some level of intuitive gifts in life tend to be better communicators in death, and someone that is newly dead needs to learn to communicate like a baby learning to talk. Those reasons might be a factor, might not, who knows. Sometimes one person is just more pushy than another. In this case, I was immediately approached by an elderly redhead that wanted to make it clear to me that she was Becky's maternal grandmother. This woman was an expert communicator, and luckily, she had a name that was easy to create a visual for. She showed me a rose, and I wrote down that word on my notepad. Becky immediately gasped and covered her mouth. As I would soon find out, Becky's maternal grandmother had been called Rose. As Rose and I started to connect more deeply, it became clear that I was in for an adventure. This lady was a lot. Rose started bombarding my mind with a series of images so quickly that I had trouble keeping up and writing things down. She started by showing me an image of herself, and I started writing down descriptives like mid-40s, crazy red hair, short and sinewy, etc. Becky was reading as I was writing, and it was clear to me from her expression that some of what I was writing was spot on, but other things were off. I asked her to help me understand her expression, and she mentioned that Rose was in her 70s when she died. I explained that people showed me what they wanted to present, and often people made themselves look younger. This made her laugh because in life, Rose had never been honest about her age. Rose went on to show me dancing, specifically doing the twist, which it turns out she had done every week up until the week she died. Rose proceeded to share a handful of more mundane validations before taking things in an even darker direction. She showed me the letter J, which it turns out was a reference to her husband, who was still alive at the time. She showed me bruises, which indicated to me that their relationship had been less than happy at times. Rose then showed me a dove, which is a common sign spirits use to indicate a desire for peace or to let their loved ones know that they are at peace. When I wrote J and then the dove and peace, Becky's face soured and she explained that her grandfather's name was Joe, and they were estranged due to his treatment of her grandmother. She shared that the thought of making peace with him was unimaginable. A week later, Becky was riding a public bus, and who should walk onto that bus but her grandfather, Joe. She hadn't seen him in years, and the coincidence was unnerving to her. She couldn't force herself to speak to him, and he didn't notice her, but it was odd nonetheless. The reading ended with Rose playing a song in my head. You Are My Sunshine, which is a song she would sing to her children when they were young, and later her grandchildren. Becky referred to her own mother as Sunshine for this reason, and with that, Rose stepped back. Not only was that reading validating for Becky, it was really important to me too. As I've said before, I am my own biggest critic and I often battle with feelings of imposter syndrome. The fact that I was currently able to identify, describe, and communicate with someone that I had not known and had no way of knowing about beforehand was instrumental in increasing my confidence. The strength of my abilities and my accuracy are both deeply connected to my confidence and willingness to suspend disbelief, and many of the readings I've done since then were even more intense. After hearing this story of yours, I was thinking to myself, man, you remind me of a relative who's also gifted. He nearly died when he was a child and spent time with our ancestors while in a coma. They say ever since then he came back with something. Lo and behold, after hearing this, I saw your previous story and color me surprised. You too came back with something. There are very few ways, according to my family, to get the gift, and that was one of the crazier ways to do it. I'd love to ask you some questions sometime. I'm writing a book of my family's experiences in an investigative logic kind of way, and this method/accident is very intriguing. My working theory is that the soul is stored in the brain as kind of an anchor, and upon sufficient near-death experiences, the soul is briefly disconnected. I suspect that creates a long-lasting effect of some kind, either on the brain or on the soul. Do you have any family where this happened? My family has a significant history to this sort of thing, which makes me wonder if your ancestors dabbled in the spiritual realm too. That last approach with the notebook and writing down the different impressions reminded me of remote viewing. And also the fact that you have issues with discerning what is your own thought and what is coming from a spirit. In remote viewing, our thoughts and interpretations about the data are called overlays. The main skill in remote viewing is being able to differentiate between real data and overlays, aka imagination, knowledge in advance, analytical thoughts, etc. I have always had a keen interest in the spiritual realm. For some reason, I've always been spiritually attuned to the unseen world. I had my first experience when I was 3 years old, when I saw the spirit of my deceased uncle. He had promised my mom that he was coming to see her and the new baby in the hospital. He never made it because he got killed in an accident. However, that didn't stop him from coming by to see me. In fact, he visited me several times over the years. I grew curious about the occult. I purchased books, cards, you name it. My favorite method of communicating with the spirit world was with tarot cards. One day, I was combing through tarot cards trying to find a new deck. While I was there, a young man walked up and asked me if I would do a reading for him. I told him, yeah, I like practicing. We both went to a restaurant nearby. I made the spread and began talking to him, giving him the interpretation of the layout. The outcome of the reading was Mike, this man, had a very good male friend, Dale. They'd been friends since childhood. Their relationship became shaky when Mike fell in love and started dating a girl Dale was interested in. One day, Mike and Dale got into a bad argument and almost started a physical altercation due to this situation. The young lady really liked Dale rather than Mike. Once she knew that Dale had been interested in her all along, she broke up with Mike. I told Mike that it was a very messy situation. He needs to do the right thing. The priest showed that he was reared by a religious family and knew right from wrong. He also knew how to correct the situation. A card showed up about the past. It revealed that Mike and Dale had been childhood friends for a long time. They should not let anything ruin that friendship. Some other cards revealed more information, but the bottom line is that Mike knew his friend liked the lady. He should have not stepped in and moved ahead of his friend. If their friendship was to endure, they should respect each other and continue to value their friendship and not allow anyone to come between them. I finished the reading. The man I read to was pale and he looked sick. I was busy looking at the cards and didn't realize that he was taking what I said so hard. He thanked me and encouraged me to continue reading because I was correct and very good. However, due to religious reasons, I don't read cards anymore. I trashed my books and cards some 15 years ago. I was informed by a famous psychic detective that I was mediumistic. That's why spirits were drawn to me. I'm also an empath, but I've lost interest in tarot reading. Lasting Effects of a Near-Death Experience, Part 5. As I started to get more comfortable with my abilities, I started to open up a bit more. It became easier for me to introduce the concept to more people. The accuracy of my readings played a big part of convincing me to lean into it. As I've said before, I am my own biggest skeptic, but every time my messages got validated, it made it harder and harder to deny. This internal conflict is always there, even to this day, but after every reading I get a bit more confident. As I gained confidence and started focusing on my abilities more, things got substantially more interesting. For this story to make sense, I'll need to provide some data. This part will be boring, but I can't think of a way to tell the story of this night without doing so sorry in advance. In the summer of 2012, my wife and I decided to go to the shore for the weekend. We would be staying with her brother and his girlfriend, now my sister-in-law, who I will refer to as Jimmy and Anne. The house belonged to Anne's grandparents, which will come into play later. In addition to me, my wife, Jimmy, and Anne, we would also be joined by Becky, my wife's cousin from the last story, and another of my wife's cousins, who I'll call Joe. Joe brought along his friend Matt, who I had met once before. Jesus, there's a lot of people in this house. To make things simple, here's a quick reference guide to the people. Jimmy, my brother-in-law. Anne, my sister-in-law. Becky, wife's cousin. Joe, wife's cousin. Matt, Joe's friend. Wait, pretty much as soon as we arrived, my wife outed me to her brother. She told him about the experience we had shared with her late mother, his mother too, and about the reading I had done for Becky. Becky confirmed everything my wife said, but Jimmy was understandably hesitant to believe anything he was hearing. Anne was present during the conversation and immediately jumped in asking, "Do you feel any spirits in this house?" I told her that nothing was jumping out at me, but that I'd be willing to try and do a reading for her later that evening, half hoping that she'd forget. Her eyes lit up and I knew that I wouldn't get that lucky. We all settled in and unpacked, at which point Joe and Matt arrived. We started drinking and proceeded to have a really great night. We drank a lot. We had barbecue, we played drinking games, and all ended up skinny dipping in the bay. At one point, Jimmy fired up a neighbor's jet ski, naked, and did a few laps around the bay. Needless to say, it was a ton of fun. We got back to the house, cleaned up, and settled in to drink some more and chill out. Not more than 10 minutes after we settled into the couches around the living room, Anne reminded me about my promise to try and do a reading for her. This was obviously news to Joe and Matt, who hadn't yet arrived when my wife and Becky were telling the stories earlier, so we had to go back through all of that and bring them up to speed. I agreed and started my exercise to open up for the reading. Almost immediately, I started receiving messages from spirits. I was approached by a man who appeared to be in his late 30s. He had gray hair beginning to grow at his temples, a sharp nose, and a receding hairline. I started to describe him, and Anne recognized him and didn't seem surprised in the least that he was the person that would step forward. This was her late Uncle Calvin. The house we sat in belonged to her grandparents, who had been Calvin's parents. Calvin had lived at the shore house in the months preceding his death. There were no pictures of Calvin in the house, as his parents were still heartbroken about his passing and couldn't bear to look at them. Anne started rifling through the nearby drawer and produced a photo of 4 men in baseball jerseys. She asked which of the 4 was Calvin, and I was able to pick him out of the photo easily. This impressed everyone in the room, but I had a 1 in 4 chance, so not that impressive to me at least. I asked Anne for a notepad and started writing the messages I was receiving from Calvin. He started by showing me a very strange image. I chuckled to myself but wrote, "Purple octopus." Anne reacted visually and then said, "No fucking way." I dressed as a purple octopus 1 year for Halloween when I was 4 or 5. Clearly, I could not have known this. I pressed on with the reading, but noticed that Jimmy, Joe, and Matt were all paying closer attention now. I proceeded to write a number of things on the page, including pills, shower, shores, tools, and south side. Calvin stopped there, and I took that to mean that he wanted me to show Anne before moving forward. After reading my notes, Anne went on to tell me that Calvin had battled addiction for years before his death. He had died under slightly mysterious circumstances, and he was found dead in a motel shower at another shore point a few hours from where we were. She also told me that he had lived on the south side of the largest local city and had been a tradesman in life. She asked if I could work with Calvin to provide some clarity around his death, so I asked Calvin to show me things that might clear up the mystery. Calvin proceeded to show me a sequence of images, which I interpreted and started writing. I wrote drugs, friend, accident, fear, and shame. Then Calvin did something that no other spirit had done for me to that point. I saw, in my mind's eye, that he had been on a bender with a friend. He got too high and decided to take a shower to try and sober up a bit. He slipped in the shower, and on the way down he smashed his left temple on the soap holder and went unconscious, doing significant damage to his skull and brain. A few minutes later, his friend found him dead in the shower and decided not to call for help, fearing that he would face legal issues due to the drugs they had both been taking. I wrote fell, shower, left temple, brain damaged. I also got the distinct impression that Calvin didn't want Anne to feel guilty in relation to his passing. I felt strongly that Calvin wanted me to tell her that there was nothing she could have done. I shared all of the above with Anne, who promptly developed into an emotional, sobbing state for about 10 minutes. When she composed herself, she confirmed that everything I had said to that point was absolutely correct. The most astounding thing to me personally was that I had correctly detailed this manner of death, down to the location of the injury. Her family had wondered whether Calvin's friend's decision had cost him his life, and it gave her some peace to know that it wouldn't have mattered. She also shared with me that that night Calvin died, he had texted her, but she hadn't answered. Coincidentally, Anne was in the same shore town at the same time, and was the person who had identified Calvin's body. She had always felt tremendous guilt that she hadn't answered him, and had wondered if things would have been different if she had. Calvin began to step away, and I thought we were done for the night, but oddly, another man stepped forward and started communicating with me. Everyone was pretty shook at this point, but you can't really turn this stuff off, so I tore off the page of notes from Calvin and started a new page. This man was quite large and showed himself wearing a US Postal Service uniform. I found this oddly specific and said to no one in particular, "Calvin has stepped back, but does anyone know a portly man that was a mail carrier in life?" Matt's head snapped around and he said, "That's my uncle." Matt's uncle, whose name was Chris, went on to validate a few other things: that he had driven a unique large truck, the fact that he was married to Matt's maternal aunt, and that he had died of a heart attack. This particular part of the reading was extremely impactful for me personally, because I didn't know anything about Matt. There is no possible way that I could have provided the level of detail that I had. This made me much more confident. This was Dante Calvino. Let me know what you thought of the format for these stories, or if you have one of your own to tell. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more mystery every week.